Hey folks, this is Kalani. The first week of a new raid is always an incredibly fun time in WoW, but it's also usually one of the busiest times when it comes to quick changes and balance tuning passes. So unsurprisingly, we have a bunch of class buffs and nerfs coming, the raid itself has been tuned and changed, and a lot of loot has been nerfed and buffed as well. So let's break it all down and see how this first week of the Sanctum of Domination raid has been shaping up so far. Let's kick things off with a round of class buffs, shall we? Hunters are first on the list, and every single hunter spec will be receiving some pretty big buffs. For Beast Mastery, Kill Command, Cobra Shot, Barbed Shot, Multi-Shot and Kill Shot damage will all be increased by 15%, so that's almost a straight up 15% increase to a Beast Mastery's damage, because that's almost all of a Beast Mastery Hunter's abilities that will see a large buff. I'll be interested to see how Beast Mastery compares to the other hunter specs after these buffs, especially considering that both Marksmanship and Survival will be getting buffed as well. For Marksmanship hunters, Aimed Shot, Arcane Shot, Multi-Shot and Rapid Fire damage will all be increased by 10%, and Kill Shot will be increased by 15%. That's a big buff for Marksmanship as well, though just a 10% increase for the vast majority of the abilities versus the 15% for Beast Mastery. Still, 10% on Aimed Shot, Arcane Shot, Multi-Shot and Rapid Fire will translate to a sizable DPS increase in all situations. Survival hasn't been left out though. Serpent Sting, Wildfire Bomb, Raptor Strike, Mongoose Bite, Flanking Strike and Kill Shot damage will all be increased by 10%. So again, almost a straight 10% damage increase. Survival hasn't been doing too badly so far in 9.1, so it'll be interesting to see if they can compete this time around. Moving on, Fire Mages are also on the buff list. This isn't too surprising to me, seeing as Fire was kind of gutted going into patch 9.1, but it looks like the dev team wants to put a bit more damage back into the Fire Mages. Fireball damage will be increased by 20%, Fire Blast damage will be increased by 15%, and then Pyroblast damage will be increased by 5%. We'll have to see where these numbers leave Fire next week, because right now they aren't doing too hot. And then the last class with some buffs listed for this week is Warlock. Affliction is actually getting a straight across the board damage increase to all of its abilities. Everything will be increased by 5%. Affliction went from top dog in Castle Nathria to bottom of the barrel so far in the current patch, so getting 5% extra damage on everything might help them compete at least a little bit going forward. Now sadly there was one class that apparently was doing a bit too well I guess so far, because Shadow Priests will actually be seeing some nerfs going into next week. Devouring Plague damage will be reduced by 8%, and the Dissonant Echoes Conduit Void Bolt damage will be reduced by 5% as well, so yet another round of nerfs to the Shadow Priest's overall damage potential, with a focus on single targets specifically. Apparently this won't turn into a massive DPS loss overall from what I've heard, but a nerf is still a nerf when all is said and done. Remember that these are preliminary buffs and nerfs for the start of Mythic Sanctum of Domination. That means they could change, more classes could be buffed on Tuesday and more classes could be nerfed. So keep your eyes and ears open for any more news of class changes with the next weekly reset. If you take a look at Warcraft logs for the raid so far, it's pretty clear why these buffs are coming. The bottom 5 DPS right now across all percentiles and accounting for all bosses are Fire Mage, Affliction Warlock and then the 3 Hunter specs. That's exactly who will be getting buffed going into next week. The Shadow Priest nerfs are a bit odd. Sure, they're doing pretty well right now, but it's not like they're significantly ahead of the pack. They're not even top right now, and their lower performing passes are below many of the DPS classes that come after them. So maybe Shadow Priests dip a teeny bit next week, and the Mythic raid is going to be significantly different anyway, but I understand buffs way more than nerfs in this situation. Those bottom 5 need to come up for sure, but that doesn't mean that the ones at the top need to come down at the same time if they're not significantly ahead. Either way, things are going to change quite a bit going into next week. I'm excited to see how the logs reflect that. The raid itself has had quite a few changes this week as well, and there are even some changes for the bosses on Mythic, which makes me think the dev team might be under the impression that certain bosses would have been too easy even on a difficulty that hasn't become available yet. Most of these are going to be bug fixes, which inherently should make the bosses easier to kill for the most part, seeing as they're not going to bug out on you. Sylvanas specifically has been changed quite a bit. The encounters and rage timer was extended on normal and heroic, so you can actually use the last platform fully. This gives you quite a bit more time to finish off Sylvanas before your entire raid dies horribly, which might be all the time you need to shave off those last few percentage points of her health. There was an issue where Rive wasn't displaying its trajectory properly. That's been fixed, so as long as you dodge the lines in the intermission phase now, you shouldn't die from Rive. There was also an issue where players jumping between platforms on the last phase would bounce back and forth constantly until they were gripped or used a charge or leap or other movement ability. That was pretty hilarious, but obviously not ideal. There was also a bug where Anduin wouldn't kill you, as he should if you hopped into the center platform, and then there was even a bug where Sylvanas was starting the very last phase with more health than she was supposed to, which made the fight significantly harder because you had this random amount of health that you're supposed to burn through that wasn't supposed to be there. All in all, lots of bug fixes and a longer enrage should hopefully make the encounter smoother to progress on. As for some of the other bosses, the energy cores on Guardian were sometimes generating less energy than expected. That was fixed as well. And then Painsmith would sometimes throw out an incorrect number of flame clasp traps on Heroic. That bug has been fixed as well, though this bug fix might actually be the only one that could make a fight harder, which is going to be annoying on a fight that's already insanely difficult to take down. And then the last round of fixes was for Soul Render. His brand wasn't dealing the right amount of damage based upon the size of your raid, but that has also now been fixed. As for the changes to Mythic, Fate Scribe, Guardian of the First Ones, and Soul Render Dormazane all had significant buffs to a lot of their abilities. The fights overall haven't really changed, but a lot of the abilities will be dealing a lot more damage than they previously would have. It's not just one or two abilities either. For Fate Scribe, Call of Eternity, Diviner's Probe, and Twist of Fate were all buffed up significantly. For Soul Render, Echoing Screams, Ruin Blade, and the Chain Breaks will all deal way more damage than before. And for Guardian of the First Ones, Obliterate, Purging Protocol, Sunder, and Unstable Energy will all deal more damage. With Mythic bosses getting buffed before they're even available, it's going to be very interesting to see which bosses end up falling over next week very quickly, and which bosses take the World First guilds a lot longer to clear through. It should make for an exciting race if nothing else. That's not all the changes to the raid though. There have also been balance changes to some of the loot as well. Trinkets in particular saw quite a few buffs, so let's take a look at those. You never know, one of these buffed up trinkets might just become your best in slot going forward. All of these examples are for the item level 226 versions of the trinkets, so these are the normal mode ones, so expect to see even higher values for the higher item level variants. The Titanic Ocular Gland will grant you 117 of your higher secondary stat, up from 112. The Tome of Monstrous Construction now grants your damaging abilities a very high chance to deal 507 additional shadow damage to your studied foe, up from 467. The Shadowed Orb of Torment now grants 432 mastery, up from 268. That one is a huge buff, which will likely make this trinket one of the better options for anyone who loves mastery. The Ebon Soul Vice can now critically strike, is improved by your haste, and deals damage immediately upon application, but its damage over time effect was reduced down to 781 from 1324 to compensate. And then the Salvaged Fusion Amplifier now causes your attacks to have a very high chance to deal 1290 arcane damage, up from 1189. These changes will also go live with the next weekly reset alongside the class changes and whatever else creeps into the mix. There are also some planned changes to Shards of Domination, and with them coming from the raid as the main source, that means raiders can look forward to even more buffs in the future. It's actually an interesting buff in my opinion. Instead of buffing the shards themselves, the dev team has looked into buffing the power of the set bonus that you can equip based upon your individual shards upgrade level. So if you have 3 unholy shards equipped to make use of the Chaos Bane rune word, which let's be honest, that's what the vast majority of us will be doing because the actual actual balance of the runeword sets is terrible, but anyway, if you have 3 unholy shards at the first level, that's the base power level of the set bonus. If you upgrade all of them to the second level, which is an ominous shard, the power of your Chaos Bane runeword will be upgraded and will increase. This means you'll have to think about whether you want to upgrade your individual shards first to increase their power level, or upgrade them all more gradually and all together to beef up the power of the runeword. That also means that as the tier progresses and you upgrade your shards more and more, you're actually going to see larger increases to your damage and healing potential thanks to the set bonus now scaling on top of everything else. These changes have not been put into the game just yet, and we don't have an estimated time of arrival for those buffs, but I assume the dev team will want to get it into the game as quickly as possible, so probably this next reset or maybe next reset. And then there are also a lot of changes that aren't directly tied to the raid. The new legendary effects, the ones that we don't even have access to yet, have been tuned and changed this past week as well. For Death Knights, their Kyrian legendary has been buffed up to 3% per stack up to 15% total, up from 2% per stack and 10% total, and the duration was increased to 18 seconds up from 10 seconds. Their Night Fae legendary was buffed too, the strength gain will be increased to 2% per stack up from 1% per stack, and their Venthyr legendary's base damage has been increased by 12%, so buffs all around for the new Death Knight legendaries. For Demon Hunters, their Night Fae legendary now grants 4% agility per target struck, up from 3% per target struck, and their Venthyr legendary now extends the duration of Sinful Brand by 0.75 seconds per hit, up from 0.5 seconds. Some small buffs, but buffs are buffs. For the Druids, their Kyrian legendary was buffed up to 8% bonus stats, up from 5%, and the mastery rating given was increased to 150, up from 100, and their Night Fae legendary reduces the cooldown and duration of Convoke the Spirits, but now it will only reduce the duration by 25% instead of 50%, giving you 1/4 of your Convoke back while using this legendary. For the Hunters, their Night Fae legendary now has a 100% chance to proc the double hit on Wild Spirits if 5 targets are not hit. That is a huge buff up from the previous 35% chance. For Venthyr, the bleed damage has been increased to 60% up from 35%, and the radius was increased to 12 yards up from 8. The Paladins got a last minute addition to this list. Their Kyrian legendary was actually nerfed. Now their Divine Resonance will only last for 15 seconds down from 30, which halves its overall effectiveness. For the Priests, their Kyrian legendary's cooldown reduction was increased to 3 seconds up from 2 seconds, so it will be much easier to reach that 60-second cap, and for Venthyr you gain 5% critical strike for each second remaining for 10 seconds, up from 3% previously. For the Mages, their Kyrian legendary's echo damage was increased to 30% up from 25%, the Night Fae legendary's buff was increased to 15 seconds up from 10 seconds, and the Venthyr legendary's cooldown reduction was increased to 4 seconds up from 3 seconds. For the Monks, the Necrolord legendary's procs per minute was increased to 1.5 up from 1.25, and the Venthyr legendary's cooldown reduction was increased to 5 seconds up from 3 seconds. For the Rogues, the Night Fae legendary buff duration will last for 12 seconds up from 8 seconds, and the Venthyr legendary will grant less versatility, 0.5% per stack, down from 1% per stack. For Shamans, their Kyrian legendary had its damage increased by 50%. For the Night Fae legendary, the crit bonus was increased to 4% up from 3%, and for Enhancement Shamans, the Feral Spirit's cooldown reduction was increased to 9 seconds up from 7 seconds, and then for the Necrolord legendary, the haste bonus was increased to 8% up from 5%. And then last but not least, the Warlock Venthyr legendary will increase Impending Catastrophe's damage by 125% up from 75%, so lots of buffs in here with just a couple nerfs, and some of these legendaries might actually end up being competitive if some of these buffs don't change by reset day. There was a change planned for the Warrior Venthyr legendary from what I remember, but it was actually reverted. All of these new legendary effects become available next week at Renown 48. You will need to complete the next chapter of the campaign to reach 48 though, so if you aren't completely caught up with Renown and the story, you'd have to wait a bit longer. In other news, if you are getting frustrated or just simply confused with the catalogued research currency that you can earn by working with the Archivist's Codex, this currency saw a massive change this week. The cap on this currency was increased for about a day, and then it was completely removed. That is incredibly important because some players were actually hitting that cap, which meant they couldn't turn in any more relics, which meant they couldn't actually progress further with the rep grind without spending some of their catalogued research. But really the main problem with this entire equation is that there isn't actually anything worth buying from the Archivist's Codex vendor before you reach the higher tiers. You don't really have to buy teleporter repair kits en masse, and after you've gotten the one-time items and quests for each teleporter location, they become kind of obsolete. The same goes for rift keys. You don't really have to buy more than one at a time, which leaves you with very little to spend your catalogued research on if you aren't upgrading Korthia gear. That's the only major currency sink for catalogued research until you reach tier 6. But with the cap entirely removed now, you don't have to worry about it anymore, and if you really want to, you can save up all of your catalogued research to buy as many sockets as you can afford when you finally reach tier 6. That means you could arguably earn enough catalogued research to go from 0 sockets straight to a full 6 sockets in one day, which is kind of cool. I think we're still quite a bit away from getting to tier 6 or being able to get to tier 6, but that does give us a lot of time to save up catalogued research. And then the last little change that I wanted to talk about in this video is for one of the new mounts available in Korthia, Maelie the Wanderer. A lot of mount collectors have noticed that Maelie hasn't really been getting lost a lot, which means you can't go out and find her, which means you can't progress towards your 6 turn-ins to actually earn the mount. Well, Blizzard decided to release a blue post explaining that Maelie actually isn't supposed to spawn every day, which wasn't entirely clear on the PTR because she was respawning multiple times per day, but the blue post also said that they would be increasing the spawn rate of Maelie, and they're going to make it so that Tiny Bell doesn't call out for players' help if Maelie hasn't actually disappeared for the day. So if you haven't been able to find Maelie properly, it's probably because she wasn't actually lost, or at least lost for that day. But keep checking back whenever Maelie isn't in Keeper's Respite, she will need rescuing somewhere in the zone. And that's a roundup of all the most important news for this week. Lots of changes just before the Mythic Week. I can't wait to see how the World First race goes this time. I'm sure all of these last minute changes definitely aren't helping, and I wonder which bosses will prove to be even harder on Mythic. I'm sure Painsmith is going to be a real pain, if you know what I mean. But what do you think of the changes coming next week? Do you feel like there are other classes that need some buffs or nerfs? And what do you think about the raids so far? Have you been enjoying it? How far have you gotten? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone who subscribed on Twitch. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.